Do you want your business to grow faster? Are you open to new and out-of-the-box ways to drive revenues and increase value? How do you imagine the most successful entrepreneurs and business leaders double, triple, or expand their businesses tenfold or more? The answer is deals. This is a weekly podcast featuring conversations with business owners, executives, and leaders as we reveal behind-the-scenes details that give you, our listeners, the confidence to pursue your own deal-driven growth. On the show, we discuss a huge variety of deals, everything from large, complex mergers and acquisitions to smaller deals that you can do even without significant capital. My name is Corey Kupfer, and I've been supporting deal-driven growth for businesses for 35 years as a successful entrepreneur, professional negotiator, and attorney. My goal is to help you strategize, plan for, find, and complete deals that will help your company grow faster. Welcome to the Deal Quest podcast. Let's get started. David Barnett has been working with small businesses for over 20 years. He has helped them grow. He's helped entrepreneurs buy and sell them, and he's helped people finance them. David is an author of 7 books about small business transactions and local investing. He is the host of a YouTube channel with hundreds of videos about buying, selling, financing, and managing SMEs, and can be found anytime at his blog site, davidcbarnett.com. David, welcome to the Deal Quest podcast.
Hey, Corey, thanks for having me on.
Well, it's great. So, buying, selling, financing, advising on small business. I guess our listeners have no question about why I'm having you on. It's right up our alley. But I think you've come from it from a lot of different places. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, I want to take you back to when you were growing up as a little kid, maybe 8, 10, 12 years old. What did you want to be? Because of, a business broker, consultant, advisor. I doubt it was on the table at that age, but you tell me. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, I wanted to be Alex P. Keaton from that TV show. And so when I was a teenager, I was born in 75. So in the 80s, that's when I was, young and growing up watching that TV show. I remember the character. I forget the name of the show, but
Family Ties?
Family, yes. And it was all about, and then his character was all about money. And I was always interested in business. And so I knew in high school in particular that I wanted to grow up to be a businessman of some kind. Right. And I was always getting my hands into childhood businesses. Growing up in Canada, that meant, getting into snow removal, of course, and, lawn maintenance in the summertime and that kind of thing. And so when I finished high school, I went to business school, and it took me until about third year before I realized that they weren't turning me into a businessman. What they were trying to turn me into is what I now call a Fortune 500 bureaucrat. Yeah. Which was a big, a middle manager in some kind of big outfit, and we were sitting around doing case studies about whether General Electric should enter some new market with, their whatever product. And I'm thinking to myself, this has nothing to do with any of the businesses I see when I'm driving around. And those were the businesses that I was interested in. And so what we would call today small and medium-sized business or Main Street business. And so the real good fortune that I had, Corey, was when I was finished up with university, I got my first job as a sales representative with the Yellow Pages. And so my job was to go out and meet with the owners and managers of the exact businesses I was interested in. And I got to talk with those people and ask them some really big questions like, next time the phone rings, who do you want it to be? Or what's your ideal customer look like? Or how do you make money in this business? And so this is where I got that mile wide, inch deep kind of knowledge base about business, was from going around and talking with all these different people. And that was the 90s by that time. And in those days, no matter where in the world you were, if you typed plumber into Google, you would get a plumber in California. And so they hadn't figured out the local search yet. And so if you needed any kind of service in any local place, wherever you happen to be, you still reach for that phone book in those days. And so that's, where I really sunk my teeth into business. And I left after about 7 years because I could see where the future was going. Google was getting better. The internet was changing. Smartphones were coming out, this type of thing. And I left that to get into business for myself, and had a succession of businesses. My first one that I sold was with a partner. That was kind of interesting. Then I got into being a finance broker. And this is where I sort of expanded my knowledge on the aspects of getting financing for business. And then the financial crisis in '08 is what led me to business brokerage, because I saw some of the deals that were put together rather poorly that I was asked to try to get financing for. And I saw that there was a need here in my local market for someone who could be more of a professional business broker. And it just kind of lit up all my desires and all my bells in my brain, because I was interested in business. I was interested in business deals. I was interested in doing things about business. And the idea of meeting all these business people and trying to fit the buyers and sellers together just really was exciting to me.
Love it. And there's so much I want to delve into in that because, all that experience has informed what you do now. And there's so many lessons I'm sure you learned from it. But before we go there, I'm going to take you back on one more thing, which is, what was your first deal of any type? And it could have been something small when you were a kid growing up, or maybe it was your first deal, when you were employed. But you tell me what comes to mind.
Well, one of the most interesting stories I have of an early deal was when I was in my first year of university. Yeah. Of course, back in those days, more people were smoking cigarettes. Yeah. And so I got the idea that it would be really great to put my university's coat of arms onto Zippo lighters, and that this would be a sought after product. So I contacted the Zippo company and I sent them the crest, and they were about to make them when they came back to me and said, "This looks like some sort of trademarked or copywritten object. Do you have permission to use this?" And of course I didn't. So I had to go and talk with the school administration, and they didn't say no. What they said was that I had to properly license the coat of arms. Yeah. And so I had to pay them a royalty based on the cost of the Zippo lighters. And so I had 100 of them made, and I actually sold almost half my inventory to the school's own bookstore. And so I paid them a royalty, and then I sold them a bunch of lighters, and I made a profit on that end. And the rest of them I sold myself personally, just, in the hallways of the school. But I think that was one of my most fun and creative business deals. I was 18 at the time.
So an early licensing deal. What's fascinating to me is that they didn't have a minimum, licensing.
100 was the minimum. I was afraid of.
Oh, so it was a minimum, but it was that little, right? And that's amazing that you were able to do that.
Yeah, they were pretty.
How much money could the school have made on that, right?
Well, you know what? I think that my cost was something like $14 or something per item, and I think I had to pay the school like 20% of that. So, wow. Yeah. If I recall correctly, because I was trying to retail them for 25 and 30. So
wow. Yeah. I love it. So what was it, before we get into some of the specifics obviously I always talk about the mindset of a deal maker, right? One of the things we talk about, sure, we talk about structuring deals, nuts and bolts, how you find deals, how you broker deals, how you value deals. But this mindset of a deal maker thing is always fascinating to me. And obviously you were, clearly intrigued, right, by deals and by business. What had it be so intriguing for you, and what drove you to check out all these different aspects, right? Finance, brokering, all that kind of stuff. Like what was the motivator for that?
Well, what I've always found interesting is I kind of approach things like a puzzle or a game. And so the question is, what are the rules to this game? And so when you're talking about business, like one of my first businesses was a ripoff of a popular franchise. We were removing junk, and I just kind of copied those guys and built it on my own. Yeah. And but in that world, you're doing your marketing, you're doing your advertising. No one really tells you, outside of a regulated kind of area, no one really tells you where you have to set your price or what the rules are. You just have to try to do it in such a way that you make money. And so it's kind of open to creativity. When I got into financing, I learned that every lender, every bank had a set of rules, and some of them were a little bit different one from the next, which is what makes brokering debt possible, because you can decide this deal goes to this place or this deal goes to that place based on what their rules are. And so I learned how to play within those rules. But I've found that a lot of business owners and a lot of people who want to get into business, the first question they ask is, what are the rules? How do you make the deal happen? How does this work? How does that work? And they're not entirely comfortable with the idea that if you're just talking about two business people coming together, neither of them have to agree to participate by any set of rules. It's just whatever they want to do together, And so in that vacuum, a lot of people, I think, have a hard time getting a point of reference because there's nothing to bump up against or no place to land. And so you really get into this world of having to be creative. And as soon as you start to learn about this stuff, and back when I started to learn, it was hard to get your hands on information. The internet wasn't as full as it is today of this kind of stuff. I mean, you didn't have Amazon and Kindle books and all this sort of thing. Sure. I remember I found this book advertised on a website, and it was by a fellow in Arizona or California, and it's on the bookshelf back there. And he was talking about how he was an investor in secondary private market mortgage notes, but also business notes.
Yeah.
And so when I read that, I was like, wow, there might be some interesting things in there. And so I had to like mail away a check, and I got a box with a book that had been made at a Kinko's, like this guy was publishing 20 copies at a time, because it wasn't any great demand in those days for that kind of specialized knowledge. And so I spent a lot of time hunting for stuff so that I could learn what other people had done to try to create these templates for myself of how things could happen. And a lot of times it's kind of interesting. People almost won't believe the stories of the things that you create. Yeah. One deal in particular was one of the deals I put together when I was a business broker. I had a buyer and seller, and the buyer wanted more money than the business was worth. I don't know if you've ever heard of this before, Corey, but the buyer, the seller wanted more money than the business was worth. The buyer wanted to pay less, but the seller was in a unique position. He was a gentleman in his 80s and had really made no plan beyond his own business as far as retirement or whatnot. He didn't really have anything in the way of savings.
Succession plan. Yeah.
And so the buyer, offered him money that he was going to borrow from the bank, and he wanted him to hold a seller's note. And the seller came back saying, well, if you'll let me finance it at a really low interest rate, I'll finance more, and I want a higher price. So it was basically the offer was like 300. The seller came back and said, I'll take 380, but I'll finance 80% of it at 2% over 10 years or something like this. And the buyer said, you know what? Even though I could get it for less if I get the bank loan, I can't get money at 2%.
Right.
And what the seller did basically is he turned his business into an annuity to create a retirement income for himself. Yeah. And, most people would never go into a deal asking for the seller to finance, 70 or 80% of it at 2%. But in this scenario, that's what actually worked for the seller, because he was trying to maximize the overall dollars. And when the deal was done, I asked the seller, I said, how did you feel about the deal? He said, that was awesome. The guy at the bank was only going to give me 0.5% interest. Now I got 2%. And so he was even excited by what you and I might call a low interest rate.
That's right. And at the same time, the thing that I love about that story is because there's creativity in deal making, right? And the truly good deal makers, whether they are investment bankers, business brokers, principals, attorneys, et cetera, find creative ways. And they also listen to what the other, people need, right? I mean, I've got a couple of situations. I got a deal going on now where there are definitely, I believe my client's going to get the deal done as a buyer. There are definitely buyers that are offering, that are, aggregator firms, right? Private equity backed, are offering higher numbers, much higher numbers. But that's all they're offering, right? More money. Whereas my client is offering equity in the firm going forward, the ability to stay on and continue having influence, some protection for the employee group, a bunch of things that some sellers may not value. I mean, if somebody's just out there looking for the top dollar, they're going to go with a buyer that's got the most money. But when you determine that the seller or buyer, whichever side it's on, or if it's not even an M&A, any kind of deal, that their objectives are different, you may be able to speak to those. And that's what you talked about there, right? You can a retirement stream.
Well, yeah. And one of the things that I highlight for anyone who will listen is that when you're doing a business deal, like if you think about two business people that come together to work on something together, no matter what it is, they're going to work with each other. They're going to collaborate, and eventually something will get written down or whatever it is they've agreed on, right? And for some reason, when people talk about buying or selling a business, a lot of people want to retreat to the idea of how we approach buying and selling a car or a house. And they get into this confrontational mindset where it's me versus you, kind of, I'm going to offer low, you're going to ask for more. And I've always said that a business deal to buy or sell a business has got to still be within a collaborative framework, which means there has to be a relationship between the buyer and the seller, and they have to be able to talk to each other to understand what each party wants. Here where I live, business brokerage is practiced with one intermediary. We don't have, buyers having their own broker, that kind of thing. And people would often say, why is that? And I'd say, well, as an intermediary, I need to have access to both parties to talk with them and understand what they're trying to get in order for me to imagine a potential deal that I might try to push each party toward, that I think will work. It's up to them to agree to it. But if I don't know what that other party is, if they're behind another intermediary and I don't have access, then I'm not going to be able to learn. And so how could the other party to the deal learn what they're looking for? I have a client right now who's looking at a business in the west of the United States. And it's one of these scenarios where the broker is trying to stand in front of the seller and won't let anyone have any high degree of personal contact. And so it's difficult to go on anything other than just what the broker tells you. And of course, the broker's saying, yeah, biggest price, biggest down payment kind of thing. But there could very well, to your point, Corey, be some of those other concerns that are actually important to that seller, but we can't reveal them if we don't have access.
Yeah, and that's a fascinating thing because, it's funny. And listen, people have these comments about lawyers as well. So it's not just business brokers, right? And listen, I think in some cases it's legit. In some cases it's not, right? On the one hand, I think you're really good advisors, no matter what role they play, whether it's an attorney, whether it's a business broker, whether it's an investment banker, right? They're really going to, first of all, have confidence in themselves that they don't need to, they're not worried about getting cut out of the deal. They're not worried about whatever. And it's not like I'm not saying you give unfettered access to the client, because sometimes actually part of what the client wants is not to have to deal with that, right? To have you be able to run the deal and, vet things out and narrow it down. But there often comes a time in a deal where it's appropriate, right? I mean, I've got another deal going on right now where we've been back and forth, and it's been through me and an intermediary on the other side. Good people, somebody I've dealt with in the past, good guy, whatever. But it's gotten to the point where there are some, there's a handful of important items left. And I said, listen, let's schedule an all parties call. Right. And to his credit, he was like, yep, good idea. Right. Because it's at that point where going through intermediaries becomes inefficient, and also where things can be lost in translation. Like there's an efficiency factor that intermediaries can provide. And then there's a point at which actually, no, it's less efficient, right? It's less beneficial. And I think the good intermediaries know that, that line, and are willing to, expose folks to their clients when it's appropriate. It's not really a question in there, but that's been my experience. I'd love to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, you know what, and I agree. In the space that I work in, which I define as the Main Street space, sort of a sub 500,000 EBITDA level cash flow businesses. There's a lot of owner managed businesses in that space. So a lot of entrepreneurs doing their thing every day. And so I actually, when I'm talking about business brokers, I actually specifically delineate. I use the term qualified business broker. Yeah. Because there are so many people that get attracted into that space because of the perception of higher commission rates, for example, versus like real estate or something like this, right? Yes. And people will say, oh, that's those guys, they sell $1 million business, they're going to get like $100,000 paycheck. That I'm going to go do that. And what ends up happening is that person then jumps into it and they spend a year trying to find clients, trying to do a deal. They don't, they end up leaving. And so you have a vast churn of a lot of players in that business with very few, that you can come across who are like your 15-year veterans that have helped 100 deals or whatever. And those are the ones that you need because they've had a chance to actually ripen into having the confidence, wisdom. I like what you pointed out about the fact that a lot of some of this behavior from intermediaries can come from this fear of being cut out somehow and not ending up with their commission. And there's lots of jokes about the term broker, right? Why are they called a broker? Right? Corey, I know everybody knows. We don't have to tell the punchline of that joke.
And it's interesting because it's a tough space that you're in, but on the flip side, it's such a competitive advantage, right? When you're good, because there is a lot of churn. And I've, over 150 some, I don't know, your episode's probably gonna be somewhere around 160, let's call it. we've had maybe a couple other folks in the smaller deal space who I know, who do this, but they're few and far between, and it is very geographical, right? Because when you're working in that space, it is often localized businesses, smaller business. You got to know the market really well. You got to know. So, even the folks I've had on who do stuff in different parts of the states, right? They're not going to mess with a deal in your market because they don't know it, right? Whereas, if you're dealing with huge, bigger companies, the geography matters a little less. So to find quality folks in there, because listen, let's face it, the joke is that even with extra zeros, it could be the same amount of work, right? And you're making less money because there's a zero or two less. So it becomes a tough space to do well and be successful in. And I find that, some of my smaller clients do struggle in that area. So I always love when I have somebody on like you, because you guys are few and far between in terms of folks that really understand that small and medium-sized localized business space and provide professional support to folks who, in a lot of ways, need it even more, right, than the bigger companies, because the bigger companies have internal finance people. They might have, head acquisitions. They might have, whatever. Yeah. They have internal capacity. Clients who are doing, who are smaller, they often don't have any of that.
Right? I remember once I was dealing with it was a deal in the garbage removal space. And, dumpsters and municipal and county routes, to pick up garbage and things like this. And the acquirer was a regional player, and they had a VP of acquisition. Yeah. And like that, basically an internal broker or searcher, like just spent their full time out looking for these deals. And so, I get what you're talking about. The other thing too is that, I'm sure the book E-Myth by Michael Gerber.
Of course, love it.
Most of the people that I'm dealing with are that on the selling side are those textbook technician people. Right. And the people on the buying side are not necessarily in the entrepreneur category, but they are people who want to own a business, who understand that it's risky to start something new. So they go looking for something that they intend to become the full-time operator of. Yeah. Now, what most of these buyers do bring, though, which kind of lines them up with what Gerber talks about in that book, is a lot of them are coming from some kind of organizational background where they have maybe middle management skills. And so they're used to standard operations procedures and checklists and systems and that kind of thing, which is usually what that business needs. And it's not there. And a lot of people look at the business and go, wow, that's a hot mess of crazy going on in there. And then these people look at that and say, I've had to sort that out before in places where I've worked, or I know the tools to, I know the exact, app or software tool that needs to be brought into this solution. And they're going to create a lot of value when they step in and do that.
Yeah, it's a great point because, so many of those deals are done owner-operator to owner-operator. But I love the distinction you made, because even though it is another owner-operator coming in, it's somebody who looks at the business and says, wow, I could really streamline the billing system, right? On that, or the customer acquisition, system, or, how they do internal job costing or assignments or what, right? Because they come from a place where they've done that. And, a lot of times in a smaller business with a founder, stuff is just evolved piecemeal, right? Like this, like it's just, it's, which again makes them potentially unattractive, but also there's the gap, right? That's what the gap shows where the opportunity is, right? So I love that distinction.
Well, and it's interesting because sometimes you can even get a complete different mindset about how the business really should be operated. I've got one client, and he has acquired several businesses. And so some people might say that he's doing a roll-up, but he understands that the nature of the businesses he's acquiring is that they are very localized, very much about local relationships, integration with the workforce, local support, et cetera. So he doesn't call it a roll-up. He says he's acquiring an array of these. And he does have a plan at one point to centralize some things, but it's not going to be, he's not going to try to run the whole thing out of one central office and rebrand it all with one name, because he knows that that's probably not going to go over well in those markets. But what he does get is now he gets to internally benchmark against himself. He gets to compare one to the other. And so even though he's not getting the full advantages of that one might think about doing a roll up and centralizing everything. He definitely still does accrue advantages in doing this. And a lot of the times the sellers, they believe that their business has to be an owner operator kind of setup. And he's operating over many states. So he's figured out how to run it remotely. And that is a skill that he brings to the table from his previous employment, where he was in a big company and he had people reporting to him in different countries. And so it's skill set and maybe even an awareness of what is possible. Before the lockdowns of 2020, I'll bet you there were a lot of business people that did not believe their business could function unless everyone came together in an office. And then all of a sudden, they were forced to figure it out in just a week or two. And now there's a local gentleman I know who owns a business. He sent his staff to work from home during the lockdowns. And then 8 months later, he tried to start calling people back. One of them had moved away, never told him.
Right. And people don't want to go back. It's really fascinating, right? I mean, that's such a great example where, right, you have somebody who has experience. I'm assuming that guy you're talking about had put some sort of management. And when I say management, like it's probably a person, right? not a like in place in the various geographies, and he knows how to do that because he did it at the big company. And it's fascinating to me because, listen, it's what makes those businesses sometimes hard to buy, right? Because they're too. I mean, Gerber talks about it, right? They're too owner dependent, right? And things like that. So you got to get by that, and then you got to be able to see the upside. And it's one thing for folks who want to buy themselves a job, like maybe the owner had, but then to be able to see, okay, well, yeah, I can be an owner operator, but I'm going to do it in a different way. That's really the opportunity, right?
Let's take a break from the show for a minute so I can invite you to a new way to determine your deal readiness. I created a fast and easy assessment that will determine exactly how deal ready you are. Once you complete the assessment, I use your responses to identify the obstacles that are holding you back from being a deal-driven growth genius. It's as easy as heading to CoreyKupfer.com/assessment. That's CoreyKupfer.com/assessment and filling out a few multiple choice questions. I'll be checking in after the episode to see what your results are. Now back to the show.
What is the difference between businesses in that level? Because listen, there are so many of those kind of businesses where they don't get the enterprise value out of it, right? Mm-hmm. Owner dies with his boots on, so to speak. And, I know folks like that. And next thing you know, the business is gone, depending on what kind of industry they're in. Maybe they have some hard assets that can be sold off or not. And obviously that's much more common in that smaller localized business space, right? Because you have fewer buyers and also just even the mentality of understanding enterprise value. So what do you see the difference between the folks that understand that they can create value beyond just their cash flow and the folks that, that just never monetize?
Well, I think that one of the, that line that I mentioned earlier, that $500,000 of EBITDA, that is sort of the line that, and this varies by industry, of course, Corey, as you know, but that's sort of the line where above that line, you can get interest for a business from a private equity group or a financial type buyer. Below that line, no, because there needs to be enough meat there for them to pay someone to run the business, sure. Right? And so there's a huge change in the valuation multiples above and below that line.
Yeah.
And so when people are below that line in the Main Street space, there is more profit in owning the business because they sell for such low multiples, like literally like 1.7 to 2.7 range.
Right. I can work another year and a half or 2 years and make
most of the time when I meet with one of these business owners who wants to exit and I show them what their business might likely sell for, their exact response is, well, if I just stayed here for another 2 years, I'd have the same money and still own the business. I'm like, yeah. So why do you need to sell? And you notice I use the N word, need. Because no one in that space sells a business to cash out like a Silicon Valley tech entrepreneur might. Right? The valuation multiples just aren't there. And so I advise people, you prepare your business for sale, not just because you want to sell it, but because when it's prepared for sale, it's easier to run and usually becomes more profitable and problems become exposed when you get it ready for sale. And then you run that business as best you can. There are multiple ways to exit. You can sell a business, but if you can spend 4 months in Florida while you join meetings over Zoom every once in a while. Well, that is a form of an exit if you're not there every day, right? And so really, if people can get organized, they can run it for a while they kind of semi-retire. But they're not going to get ever the same multiples as if they had an EBITDA of 750. So there is another flavor of buyer that I occasionally run into. These are the people who are interested in those bigger businesses, but they get priced out by people like the private equity groups or the search funders who've got some backing and are willing to use a high leverage SBA loan or something like this. And so what these people will do is they'll purposefully look for something in the Main Street space that they think is going to lay the foundation for them to grow either organically or through further add-on acquisitions.
Yes.
And their whole plan is to buy in at a 2x, get it above that line. I call it the pig peg line. And now they're going to be exiting 3, 4, 5, who knows, right? Depending on what happens. And so that's a real project in growing value if that is at the outset what the plan is. I deal with a lot of people that work on the 50th floor of a New York building too, that are trying to buy the fishing lodge in Colorado,
right? Because
they want to get out of their career and they want to own a job because they want to have a much more relaxed lifestyle. And that's the other thing too, is, I remember at one point I was in an office with a banker and he was looking at a deal and I was helping a client buy this business. And the banker said, this isn't much more than owning a job. Why would anyone ever pay money to get a job? And so I picked up his business card and I pointed to the MBA after his name. And I said, I don't know, why would anyone ever pay money in order to be able to get a job? You're right. At least my client was acquiring something with an established cash flow.
Right.
And so there is that, sort of thing going on because people in this Main Street space are not necessarily motivated by numbers. The sellers are motivated by a personal need to get out of the business because something's changed in their life, retirement or an illness or something in their family. And then sometimes the buyers are equally motivated, again, by these personal things where they want to get out of that rat race career job and they want to get into something that they see as a little more relaxing or can give them a better quality of life.
I remember a guy, it reminds me of the story, I haven't thought of it in a while. I remember a guy who was a big time trader down on Wall Street, literally, on Wall Street. And he made millions of dollars a year, right? And he was in his early 50s or even maybe in the late 40s. And he's like, enough of this. He grew up in Vermont. He wanted to go back to Vermont. And he bought like a bed and breakfast in I think it was in Stowe. No, maybe it was in Mount Stowe, one of the towns. I forget where it was. And it was phenomenal. Like they had a reputation of having a great restaurant. It was a really beautiful bed and breakfast. Obviously, he had people, sort of run it day to day. But that's what he wanted to do. That was his dream, right? And he's going to leave, making I'm talking about, $4, $5, $6, $7, $8 million a year, depending upon the year. And the firm said, "What are you, crazy? What do you want?" And of course, listen, he was at the point where he didn't need the money, but also it was just lifestyle. He ended up with the best of both worlds because the firm thought he was so valuable. They said, "Well, why don't you just?" And this is way before, and this is years ago, right? They said, we'll put a satellite dish. Why don't you get a place up there? We'll put a satellite dish on a roof because that's what you needed back then. Yeah. And why don't you continue to trade? He said, "Okay, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I will trade 3 mornings a week. That's it." Right. So you got a little storefront in, wherever it was in Vermont. Right. It was, they put a satellite dish on the roof and he went in 3-4 hours a day, 3 days a week. And the rest of the time he hung around the bed and breakfast and talked to the guests and, skied and whatever. And he was, he got the most of both worlds. That's not available to most people, but it reminded me, I met the guy because we stayed there and he was an amazing guy, so it's funny.
But what's interesting is that if you ask most people, and so part of my work is when I meet with a client, I usually ask this question. I say, "Well, what do you want?" Yeah. And people go, "What do you mean?" And I say, "Well, right. Well, a year from now, what would your ideal outcome be? What would your life look like? Like, what do you want?" And it's amazing to me how few people are able to quickly answer that question, And the fellow that you're talking about, the trader, at a certain point, he probably realized that what he wanted was not, the millions of dollars every year. something else just kind of crept up that hierarchy of desires in his life to motivate him to make a change that a lot of people would think maybe was silly, but that's because millions of dollars are up on their hierarchy. They haven't been in his shoes yet.
That's right, 100%. And it was great. He was living the life, man. Like he was so happy. I was sitting there having a glass of wine with him. He loved greeting the guests and just getting talking to people and hearing people's stories and very unpretentious guy. And and he was still probably making $1 million or $2 million a year, right? Like just trading part-time, right? But you never know it. If we just happen to get, like, I don't think he really shared that with people. We just happened to get talking because I had an office down on Wall Street at the time, and I was dealing with a lot of like clients like him. So he knew we were, and he told me the story. But with most of the folks who would show up there, they would have no idea this guy had made and was still making probably $1 million or $2 million. It was just some guy running a high-end bed and breakfast with a cool restaurant. So it was great. So let's be. I realize that we've talked about you were the business broker side, the valuation side, and maybe people are getting a flavor for it. But you and I spoke before we went on air. But let's make really clear to folks exactly what you're doing now, right? What your role is. Yeah. And the market you serve, which we've sort of generally alluded to as well. But let's have people fully understand it.
Yeah, sure. So I was a business broker for 3 years. And in that time, I sold 36 companies for other people. And on paper, if you looked at the financial statements of that business, you would say, wow, because I would have 30, 40% growth year over year. And what those statements wouldn't tell you is that every one of those years had a period of 8 to 10 months with no closings. Right. And so it's the ultimate in circus businesses in that it goes up and down with cash flow. And you can have a bunch of money come into your bank account, which you're afraid to spend because you don't know when the next check's arriving. And then you end up into your lines of credit and credit cards at other times a year. And then you're not sure if a deal will close in time and you're going to get in trouble with your banker or whatnot. So I don't know if people can, if you show any video of this, Corey, I've got gray hair on the sides of my head and it all comes from that period of my life. It was just crazy. And so I left. I sold the brokerage to one of my associates on a note. That's how motivated I was to get out of there. Yeah. And I got hired by a bank, and I was doing revolving credit for supply chain financing. So I wasn't doing anything to do with business buy or sell or small business. I was dealing with larger businesses at the time. And so after about a year, my phone just started ringing. It was all these people who'd been given my name by other people, and they wanted help. And I said, look, I don't do it anymore. And eventually I said, you know what, I can help you, but I have a full-time job. I'd have to charge you like some kind of consultant, and I can only work off hours. And the guy said, yeah, great. Where do you live? I'll be at your house on Saturday. And that was the beginning of what became this little side consulting gig of helping people buy and sell businesses as a coach / consultant. And then I started writing books, and I got onto YouTube back in 2014. And I started to answer people's questions on YouTube and make these videos. And the more questions I answered, the more viewers I got. And then I got more questions. Yeah. And then I started to get approached by people from all over who were watching the videos from all over the Anglosphere, English speaking countries. And so that's what I do now today. So I took the fact that a lot of people wanted to know about the same stuff. I created a couple of online courses. So I've got one on buying businesses, one on selling businesses, and a few others around that, like cash flow forecasting and things of this nature. And I run a group coaching program for people that are working at buying businesses. And my one-on-one clients, they are either people that want to buy or sell one of these Main Street businesses. And I use a menu. So I've got a menu of these are the different things along the way. And here's the things I can help you with. And this is what I charge. And so what it's done for me is it's allowed me to smooth out that cash flow. So I have clients all the time that I'm billing all the time, like a lawyer or an accountant would have, working with different clients. But what it does for the clients is actually kind of amazing, because when I was a business broker, I had to charge double-digit commissions.
Sure.
Because my education, my background, my experience meant that I needed to be a six-figure guy, right? And in order for me to do that, I had to charge double-digit commissions because I only was able to charge the clients whose businesses I sold. Right. And for everyone you have that sells, there's others that do not. And so what I realized after a while was I've got successful business owners who've done everything right to make a desirable, successful business who are actually subsidizing my efforts to try to sell the businesses of their peers who were not as successful.
Right, right.
And so nowadays, everyone pays. And what it means is that when I'm working with a seller, I can guide them through this process. And what they'll end up paying to me for my help is far less than what they would have paid me back in my brokerage days.
Right. And the reason why I love that as well is because there is benefit to even a potential seller who goes through a process and doesn't sell, right? Because they have to go through the due diligence. They have to get their books cleaned up. They have to understand what the gaps are, in terms of even why maybe they didn't get a deal done, which helps them then improve their business going forward. So there's value they get, even if the deal doesn't get closed, whether it's because of market change conditions, whether it's because they have an unrealistic view of their value, whether it's because there are gaps in their company that, so they're getting value in the process. So it, in that way, it lends itself to much more of a consultative process, and not many people are doing that. And in terms of where your clients are, I mean, I know you've got, a local presence, but you've mentioned deals you've done in the U.S. and whatever, so it's not limited to your locality, right?
Well, actually, between 60 and 70% of my clients are in the States, and the balance are, split between, the other English-speaking countries pretty evenly, actually, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. And it follows the viewership of my YouTube channel, really. Yeah. And my training when I was studying to become a business broker was all in the States anyway. So it was all through the IBBA. Sure. So very familiar with what goes on down there, and work on deals all the time in the States. Most of the people that are in my buying group coaching program as well are in the States. And so, I mean, I talk with bankers down there and stuff like that all the time too. And it's interesting to see the differences between the countries, Corey. One of the things.
Give me some of the highlights.
Well, no other country has something like the SBA, for example. And so what the SBA does is it changes the way deals are done, because they will finance a percentage of the purchase price. In no other country, banks will do this. In other countries, banks will finance percentage of tangible value of assets. And so, in Canada, if you find a profitable business, there will be a good amount of goodwill in the purchase price. Well, no bank's going to lend against that.
Wow.
And so it actually creates a further requirement for sellers to be more participating in the financing of the deals. In the States, with the way the SBA is set up, a lot of sellers, if they believe their deal is SBA qualified, it will make them feel like they deserve to get 95% of the money on closing day. And so it skews the perception. And the result of the additional leverage, if you think back, remember that thing called the subprime mortgage crisis? Do you remember that?
Yep, sure did.
And that what the problem was there is that you made more credit available to more people and higher leverage, and prices went up. Same thing happened. So if I look at a bowling alley in upstate New York versus a bowling alley in Ontario with the same profit in nominal dollar terms, that American bowling alley will sell for far more than the Canadian one. And it's because more people can get more leverage, and it drives up the prices.
Yeah. Fascinating. Yeah. It's interesting to me how, it's so different. I mean, I remember, as I've traveled the world, which I've had the blessing to do over the last, 30 years, whatever, and also been a member of entrepreneurs organizations. So I know owners of businesses around the world through EO. And you find out things that you just don't assume. Like, for example, in various countries, like the availability of even mortgage money to buy houses is not as significant. So people are, unable to finance houses that, places where they, it's fascinating the things we take for granted in our particular localities in terms of the way they work. And listen, we all know access to capital. I mean, certainly, SBO is a factor, but I'm looking at nowadays at how much capital there's available on bigger deals in the PE and venture capital space, and just, and angel investors across the spectrum. And it always pushes prices up, right? Because the more capital that's available, the more potential buyers there are, and basic supply and demand, the more buyers that are in the game, the more, prices tend to go up. So it's a fascinating.
Well, and sometimes you can actually get buyers that have these perverse incentives. I know I had a client that I was working with who was trying to buy a business in San Diego. He eventually got outbid by a PE firm, and remained friends with the broker. And afterwards was having a conversation with the broker, and the buyer at the PE firm had said to him how happy they were to have been able to do the deal because they needed to deploy the capital.
Yes.
Because there was a perception amongst their investors that if they didn't get the money out working somehow, that they were somehow not good stewards of the money.
100%.
And so I was thinking, like, this is actually pushing certain people to do deals that they maybe even know are not that good, but they want to be able to show that they've done something.
No question. And listeners of this podcast know that on various episodes, I've talked about this concept of deals of discipline and how it's easy to lose deal discipline when you have capital that you have to deploy. So 100%, David, 100%. So if people want to find out more about your programs, your group program, your online programs, whatever it is, I know we gave a URL at the beginning, but give it again, or if there's any other URLs or ways to contact you, obviously your YouTube channel, let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, the best place to go is at davidcbarnett.com. It's my blog site, and I post all the articles and videos and stuff that I do there. And there's links, work with David and my courses and books and everything. And anyone who wants to learn more can head over there. There's literally hundreds of hours of content. I'd love for people to come and use and share and read and learn from. And, while I love working with clients, obviously that's how I make my living. What really warms my heart is when I get emails from people who say, I watched a bunch of your videos and it helped me not do this dumb deal. And I think that is awesome because, money is life. You literally put your time and effort into acquiring it, and it represents that effort you made. And for something to happen that caused you to lose it really it's time slipping through your fingers. So that's what I'm all about, is helping people to avoid bad deals.
I love it. And I love the fact, you said 2014, which was some relatively early in the YouTube, era, not earlier, but relatively early. And I love the fact that, this is not directly on a deal point, but just as a business point. I mean, I involved with the National Speakers Association as a professional speaker. And this question comes up all the time about, I don't want to give away my content. Right. And I think anybody who understands the way the world has changed is, no, you should give away content, right? Like that's the opportunity. And the truth is that if you're really good at what you do, that's one, you're benefiting and serving more people, which those of us who really care what we do, I know that's always a big motivator, right? It's not about making a buck on everything we do. But two, it actually does flow back to you because, people, you get to be known as, as an expert. People see you out there. You've given them value, so they're more inclined to want to work with you because they appreciate the value you've given. So I just want to point that out as an example of somebody, that aligns with a philosophy that I definitely believe in, is that the more you give, the more you get, and you want to benefit people. And certainly with online content, like you used to be, I'm a lawyer, right? Used to be people would protect their intellectual property. Everything's got to be protected, right? And I'm sure certain things, you're not going to let somebody take your online course and reproduce it and sell it on their own, right? That's appropriate to protect. But giving away a lot of free content really, really makes sense.
Well, if you there's a lot of diagrams out there that will describe, the sales cycle, and there's usually a portion there called rapport building or relationship building where, the client has to become comfortable with you and realize that you are qualified and all that kind of thing. And what I've noticed is that by being present online and answering people's questions and sharing information has automated that part of my sales cycle. So I don't get calls from people who say, I want to meet with you on the phone so I can learn more about how you can help me. Nobody ever asks me that anymore.
Right. I know.
People just email me and they say, I've been watching your videos all week and this is my project and what does working with you look like? And so they know that I can help them and they know that they want to work with me because they've spent some time getting to know me. And I would say probably this is, one of the motivators behind you hosting a podcast too, right? I mean, you probably see the same thing, right?
Yeah, no question about it. I mean, I've got similar to you. I mean, one, I have this passion for, to have folks understand that there are so many different types of deals that they can do, no matter what industry, size, company, whatever, and to help them grow their business. And that's a pure motivation. And I get, when people say that the content has made a difference for them, it gives me a lot of joy, period. And then, listen, it gets my name out there. And as people understand that this is a passion area of mine, it's an experience area of mine, I'm providing them with a lot of value. And absolutely, they'll reach out and say, hey, Corey, I've been listening to your stuff and now I've got a deal, or I want you to help me, come do one of your whiteboarding sessions so we can figure out what types of deals, would be best for us. Or, so it's the same thing. I mean, 100%. David, we could speak forever, and I do. And, you and I will definitely stay in contact, and because we have a lot of the same passions. But it is a podcast, and do need to bring it to an end. So I'm gonna ask you my final question, which is, my highest value in life is freedom, and that applies across the board for me. Everything from, I believe people should have freedom from oppression of every type, to why I'm an entrepreneur and I haven't had a boss in decades. What does freedom mean to you, and how does it apply to your life and business?
Yeah, well, what freedom means to me is the freedom to choose the kind of life that you want to provide, not just for yourself, but for others. So, one of the reasons why I left the bank when I did to make this my full-time thing, I'm a single dad. And at the time, my kids were in school until 1:30 in the afternoon. And I needed something that I could see that I could produce that full-time income between 8:30 and 1:30 every day, so that I didn't have to send the kids to daycare. And so I don't think I'd be able to find a job like that. And so, this is what business gave to me, the opportunity to provide my kids with the childhood I wanted to give them. Yeah. So it's different now. They're a little bit older. They come home and make their own snacks, and they just want to watch TV and play video games. But for many years, it was totally worth it. And today, of course, I still get to enjoy the benefits of being able to control my time. Yeah. And to me, that's freedom. That's why I would rather do this than be working at the bank, for example.
Love it. David Barnett, thanks for being a great guest on the DealQuest podcast.
Thanks for having me, Corey.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of DealQuest, where we help you understand how deal-driven growth can be your ticket to freedom. I want to invite you to a unique way to tap into the wisdom and experience of the DealQuest community. Join the DealQuest Deal Den Zoom calls, a free monthly 90-minute mastermind. In the mastermind, we address all the challenges you may be facing and help support you with the opportunities that may arise in terms of deal-driven growth. You will get input not only from me, but all the members on the call will collaborate and serve each other in a mastermind format. To sign up for the free mastermind, go to www.coreykupfer.com/dealden. That's coreykupfer.com/dealden. I'll see you there. I'm Corey Kupfer. Until next week, wishing you the freedom and financial prosperity that I know your DealQuest will bring.